Welcome to the Psychology World podcast. I'm Connor Whiteley, bringing you psychology news, articles, and other interesting psychology-related articles. Where I can find the podcast notes and more interesting psychology-related things, and you can get your free 8 psychology book box set at connorwhiteley.net. Now let's get on to the show. Hi everyone, and welcome to episode 168 of the Psychology World podcast with me, Connor Whiteley. And today's episode is on 5 ways to live longer, according to biological psychology. So I know this is a rather different topic from that we normally focus on, because to be honest, this is like completely stepping away from like clinical psychology, which is always good though, and it's always good to help broaden our horizons. So but today's episode specifically focuses on biological psychology and how our biology can actually impact our behaviour. And I sort of guess that in terms of this episode, the behaviour that we're looking at is the health and our lifespan duration. And this is a really, really interesting topic that you can really learn from today though. But of course, nothing on this podcast is ever sort of official advice. And it is the 2nd of September 2022 as I record this. So moving on to psychology news section, we're reading from the British Psychological Society Research Digest. And the first one is, expressions of shame tell other people how not to behave. We all know that shame feels bad. There's an evolutionary reason for this. Breaking the rules of your social group puts you at risk of exclusion. So feeling bad for breaking those rules encourages you not to do it again. Now, a new paper in Psychological Science reports that when we see someone else looking ashamed, this influences our behaviour too. It seems then that shame doesn't just affect the person who's feeling it, but other people in the group as well. And the reason why this is quite a good one to look at is because as part of any social group, well, there are specific do's and don'ts, and shame is a sort of compliance mechanism. Mechanism though, rather that actually helps us stay with the group and to behave as we're meant to, but just so we don't risk exclusion. And when someone else breaks those rules and ends up feeling ashamed of themselves, it's a powerful indicator for ourselves though. Just so we can basically learn that let's not end up like that person, so let's not do what they did. So a very useful one. And the second one is, witnessing an awe-inspiring event like an eclipse makes us more prosocial. Astronomical events such as solar eclipses has mesmerized humanity throughout history. And whilst we now understand the science behind these occurrences far better than we did hundreds or thousands of years ago, we are far less likely to draw religious or mystical connotations from them. They still act as a communal event of awe and excitement. A new paper in Psychological Science from Sean Godey and colleagues at the University of California explores how these are feeling in the wake of the 2017 solar eclipse. It finds that those who witnessed the eclipse expressed more awe and more prosocial language than those who did not, and argues that astronomical events could motivate more collective attitudes. So this is actually quite an interesting one, and one though, but to actually look at it, because I sort of remember this because I was 16 at the time. And we didn't see it because of course, this is England. It was cloudy that day, that day though, so we didn't get to see it whatsoever. And then the only other thing that I want to mention about this is that I think it would be good to see how you could possibly test this, because the idea that a solar eclipse, so quite a rare astronomical event, could lead to more collective attitudes instead of individualistic ones. I'm not sure how you could test that. I'm not sure there's a concrete way how you could test it scientifically. But of course, though, this was just a paper arguing the point. So it's a great point, and I really hope that it's true, because we do need more collectivist attitudes at times. But I'm not sure how it would work in practice. So the last one is, online search algorithms reflect and perpetuate gender bias. The problem of a bias in artificial in intelligence, and bang goes the point that I was about to make, is of a growing concern. Algorithms have, for example, wrongly classified the faces of black women when detecting gender, wrongly predicted that a black defendant will reoffend twice as often, wrongly predicted as a white defendant will reoffend, and shown far more men and women on Google image searches for the term CEO. This last study found that even biased image searches can actually shape people's beliefs about the number of men and women who hold particular positions. Now, a study in PNAS goes further. It has again found that internet search algorithms reflect gender biases, and that those biases can themselves reinforce social inequality more widely. So there's actually not a great amount that I can say about this, except from this is something we absolutely have to be aware of. This is not something we can ignore, because this isn't right. This isn't right in the slightest. And in a dementia psychology book that I have coming out next year, well, I actually talk about the devastating impact that social inequalities, both gender inequalities and more than back, can actually have devastating impacts on someone's health, future, and financial situation. So this is something that we do need to tackle. Yes, it starts with being aware, but something else that I would actually quite like is that these academic papers actually give you some sort of helpful tips there, where just so you can help be more aware. But of course, in this case, because this is more to do with the search algorithms, this is sort of out of our hands. This is very much on the tech companies to actually do something about it. And of course, most of the tech companies are actually run by men, which there's nothing wrong with that whatsoever. I'm a man and I have no problems with that. But this is something that we just need to be aware of and try and counterbalance it. So I hope you enjoy the psychology news section. So let's move on to the personal update. So we're moving on to the personal update. This week has probably been one of the best weeks I've had for absolutely ages. And I know over the past few months, because there's not been that much psychology related stuff going on, and even when I was on my psychology placement, there wasn't that many little things there that I can actually tell you, but I'm actually going to change that today, because I really do want to talk about something personal, because of course this is a personal update. And to be honest, I'm not sure it really has been for a little while. I guess except for really short bits. But to be honest, this week has been one of the best I've had for quite a while, because there's been a lot of self-discovery, self-revelations, and a lot of learning about myself. And I fully admit that this sounds really weird, though, what I actually say. But to be honest, what happened was that if you've got Netflix, or to be honest, even if you haven't, I cannot recommend that you actually get Netflix, even for a month, because that's all that I'm getting it for though, and you watch Heartstopper though, because it's this absolutely great gay romance series in the YA genre. And to be honest, I do not cry at stuff. In my entire life and in my hundreds of hours of watching TV and films, might even be thousands, I have only ever cried at one other thing. And Heartstopper actually had me crying quite a lot though, because it's so moving. And if you're a gay person, it's actually really interesting to see and actually hear stuff if you've actually never experienced it. Experienced it. And the reason why I'm actually talking about it on a psychology podcast, and I promise you, my personal point will actually become clear in a moment. But the reason why I'm talking about it on a psychology podcast is that these things do affect mental health quite badly sometimes, sexuality, societal pressures, and basically people judging you and people treating you differently, and people thinking that you're a completely different person because of your sexuality. So that I thought was really powerfully done, and season 2 of Heartstopper should actually go into one of the main characters having a eating disorder though. But the program is absolutely brilliant, just by itself, and as a love story between two boys. But I think if you step back, I think there is lots of possible mental health takeaways and things that we could all take if you're straight or not. though, because it does give you an entirely different perspective though. But the reason why I really liked it, and the reason why I'm really interested in the actor like Joe Locke at the moment, is because his experience compared to mine are like polar opposites though, because and I'm actually trying to figure out how to keep this brief though, but his experience and what society has actually taught him and how he looks at about being a gay is a lot more positive, a lot more accepting, etc. So it's really interesting to actually look at his perspective and what he says. So that's led to quite a lot of realizations, a lot of reflecting on my part. So there was a lot to learn though, so I cannot recommend Heartstopper enough. I really hope that reflection made any sense. And then other news, the only other interesting thing that I've done, which isn't author related, self-reflective related, or Heartstopper related, is that yesterday I applied to be a John's volunteer to be a volunteer vaccinator, because in the UK the NHS is wanting to roll out the booster program to the vulnerable this winter, and now that I can drive, I really want to do it, because I did want to do it in the pandemic, but I couldn't drive, and it would have been so much hassle trying to get to a vaccination centre. So I applied yesterday, and hopefully I'll get it. And as always, I always love to hear your thoughts and feelings on today's episode. So you can always email me, connorwhiteley@connorwhiteley.net. You can always leave a comment at the show notes at connorwhiteley.net/podcast. And you can always tweet me on Twitter at sci-fi-whiteley. I always love to hear from all of you, because it really helps make the podcast feel more like a conversation. And today's episode has been sponsored by Biological Psychology, 3rd edition. Or to be honest, if you're listening to this in another future, it's at whatever edition it's on. And the reason why this is such a great sponsor for today's episode is that this book really does show you in a really clear, easy to understand way. That's actually engaging and absolutely nothing like the boring textbooks or whatsoever, how our biology impacts our behaviour. Because everyone thinks that behaviour is mainly a mental, all this completely down to our biology and our genetics, but neither one is true though. So what biological psychology teaches you teaches you from a wide range of topics, for example genetics, our nervous system, evolution, and so many more great topics, is that it shows you that there are so many little factors that are absolutely fascinating, and how they affect our behaviour in so many different ways. So I cannot recommend this absolutely brilliant book enough. So that is Biological Psychology, available from all major ebook retailers, and you can get the paperback book and the hardback version from Amazon at your local bookstore or local library if you request it. And if you wanted to buy it directly from me, then you can buy the ebook at payhip.com/connorwhiteley. And that's a great way to help me get more of the money and compared to the big retailers. But if you didn't want to buy a book, but you still wanted to give the podcast a bit of one-time support, then you can buy me a coffee at buymeacoffee.com/connorwhiteley. So now the personal update's done, let's move on to the content part of today's episode. So we're moving on to the content part of today's episode. So we're going to be talking about 5 ways to live longer, according to biological psychology. And because I've already done a sort of personal bit, and because I've also introduced the topic in the introduction part of today's episode, I'm actually just going to dive into it. How does autophagy affect our behaviour? In terms of biological psychology, it is rather rare for us to focus on what happens at the cellular level and how our cells affect us. However, there is a process called autophagy that affects our behaviour, and this is just critical for us to look at now. Due to autophagy is the process that our cells use to get rid of all the rubbish inside them by releasing them or letting the rubbish degrade. The things that our cells get rid of include things like proteins, organelles, and debris that are no longer effective or efficient to have in the cell, so it is packaged up and effectively kicked out. In terms of our biology and our well-being, autophagy does not only indicate how well we can live our lives, but it may also indicate how long we live for. As a result, this is a key physiological mechanism that has been conserved throughout human evolution for the sole purpose of allowing our species to thrive. Therefore, when our autophagy mechanisms are dysfunctional or overwhelmed, our cells are unable to perform at their peak, and this can result in a person to age more rapidly or to get a disease, especially as the process of autophagy also includes other biological processes, including lipotrophy. This is the breakdown of lipids, also known as fats to you and me, by lysosomal organelles. Mitophagy, the removal of our damaged mitochondria, which is critical for respiration, and autophagy. This clears out other cellular proteins as well as debris, all amongst other biological processes. And what makes this really interesting to psychologists is that most neurodegenerative conditions like Parkinson's disease and certain forms of dementia are associated with the increase and build-up of both pathologic as well as misfolded proteins. Therefore, if someone has ineffective autophagy and their cells are not being cleaned out properly, then this can have serious negative consequences. However, whilst these mechanisms are not fully understood, there are a number of different factors involved here, as well as regardless, scientists know that the regulation of a person's autophagy can be affected by our environment, nutritional status, lifestyle, and our own internal and external stresses. And to sum up the simple reason why this is important for all of us to understand is because optimizing our autophagy can be a great way to decrease our own likelihood of dementia. 5 ways you can optimize your autophagy. Avoid oils, dairies, sugars, processed food, and saturated fats. And believe me, I'm not going to lie here and pretend that this will be easy to do in the slightest, but I think that the point is more about trying to cut these down where we can, due to these foods are pro-inflammatory, and these can burden our mitochondria, resulting in an impairment to their functions and their role in autophagy. Calorific restriction. When I first read this, I was still concerned that it was going to be a part of some strange starvation diet, yet the restriction of calories by using intermittent fasting increases autophagy, and I must admit that the benefits of intermittent fasting are well researched too. But I will mention it again though, but nothing on the podcast is ever any sort of official or medical advice. Additionally, studies have shown that calorific restriction is associated with a upregulation of autophagy in the brain, liver, fat, as well as muscles, and is associated with a longer, healthier lifespan as well. The reason behind this is believed to be because of an increase in the availability of precursors and substrates for other essential biomedical reactions. Exercise. For autophagy, exercise has a lot of great benefits because doing regular aerobic exercise helps to improve the delivery of oxygen and nutrients to our cells by increasing blood flow to our vital organs, as well as it improves the transportation of packaged and degraded inflammatory metabolites and waste byproducts. Basically, the things that autophagy is trying to remove from the body. Get outdoors. Getting outdoors is definitely something that we've covered on the podcast a fair bit. And now we can add something else to the list of benefits it has. Due to exposure to nature has been repeatedly shown to upregulate autophagy and decrease inflammatory mediators in the body, like interleukins and prostaglandins. Restorative sleep. This is definitely a critical factor that I have left in till last, and this is probably the factor I've heard most about. Therefore, restorative sleep and autophagy work by both autophagy and our glymphatic system are highly active when we're asleep. Both of them work in synergy to improve the functioning and the health of our brain, and I know I've said it before, and it is something I am personally trying to work on more. But we do need to respect the circadian nature of our bodies and brains, as this does help to improve the quality of our sleep for a range of reasons I've mentioned on different podcast episodes before and in my dementia psychology book. But this does require dedication as well as motivation, and believe me, it seriously does. Something I absolutely must admit I do lack at times. However, to sum it up, getting a better night's sleep is helpful for ourselves to get rid of all of the rubbish and debris in them, which can have long-term health benefits. Conclusion. I know that this podcast episode was definitely different from what we normally cover on the podcast, but I truly believe that this is a good thing. It is good to change things up from time to time, and it is always great for all of us to take a step outside mainstream clinical psychology and the other things we normally cover. As well as, I think the nice thing about episodes like this is that when they do contain unofficial tips and little pieces of information that we can all take away from straight away. Like you could be listening to this and decide that from this point onwards you will want to improve your sleep. Which was actually rather funny, because when I was writing this last night, it was about 9 o'clock at night, and I was actually yawning quite a bit. So just because this is different, it doesn't mean it isn't something that we should look at and possibly learn from to improve our lives. So I really hope that you enjoyed today's episode and that you got something out of it. I definitely like looking at these biological psychology topics from time to time though. And if you know someone who would enjoy today's episode, then please share it with them. I'm always really grateful when you wonderful people help us spread the word about the podcast. And definitely check out buymeacoffee.com/Connor Whiteley or Biological Psychology, available in all the usual places, including on my own direct store at payhip.com/Connor Whiteley if you wanted to support the podcast. So have a great day everyone, and I'll see you next time. Thanks for listening today. I hope you enjoyed it. If you want to see the show notes, then please go to connorwhiteley.net. And if you want a free 8-book psychology box set, then please go to connorwhiteley.net. Have a great day, and I'll see you next time.